Hey guys, I wanted to let you know that the coffee you're drinking is probably bad, but I want to tell you how to identify when you're about to get good coffee versus when you're paying for bad coffee. So let's get into it. But first, let's start off with how I got into this world. Like many of you, I started drinking Starbucks. I started with a caramel macchiato, extra caramel mixed in, and I'd get an venti. I would drink that and I thought that was good coffee. Then I'd heard Peet's was good coffee. There's more of a natural coffee flavor with Peet's. So I said, okay, cool, let's get Peet's. Same thing, caramel macchiato with extra caramel mixed in. And it was like, yeah, it tastes a little bit like a more darker roast, maybe a little bit less syrup. So perfect. This is what good coffee tastes like. People said Philz coffee was really good. So I tried Philz coffee and I got the same order. I think they have some other decent mixes. Same thing, kind of got a caramel macchiato. Thought that's what good coffee was. So like anyone really going on a date, most dates usually end up with coffee. So I started dating my wife, and one of our dates, I said, hey, you know, I really like good coffee. Let's go get some Starbucks. So we went out, we got Starbucks. I got a caramel macchiato with extra caramel mixed in. Coincidentally, she said that was her favorite drink. Whether or not that's true, I actually still don't know. I think it might have been, but now she always gets iced mocha. So it may have just been her saying, yeah, that's my favorite drink too. I don't know, I digress. So anyway, we're drinking coffee and she's like, oh, okay. You know what'd be really fun, Chris, is I think for Christmas, let's go take a coffee brewing class. So that way we can make some good coffee. And I said, that sounds fantastic. So we go out there, we show up to a place called Yardstick. It was in Manila, and unfortunately it's closed now because of the pandemic, but they did a pretty good class. So I sit down and I start learning about the basics of where the beans come from, all the process it goes through to get essentially just before the barista and the grinder, where they're gonna cut up the beans for your coffee. And I was like, oh, this is pretty in-depth stuff, interesting. And then we got to an activity where they lay out 9 cups and 3 of them have different levels of saltiness, 3 of them have different levels of sweetness, 3 of them have different levels of citrus. And so he does that so you can taste and feel on your tongue what it's supposed to feel like when there's a lot of saltiness, when there's a lot of sweetness, when there's a lot of acidity. And this sounds very esoteric, and I understand, but wait till the end. So I took the samples, I wrote down my guesses. I think I did all right. My wife and the teacher got perfect scores because my wife's a trained professional pastry chef, but I did okay. Then we got to the part that really changed my perspective. He brought out 7 different cups of coffee. He brewed them right in front of us, so they're all fresh. And then we took a cupping spoon. I tasted the first one. And this is the first time my coffee had ever tasted like blueberries. And I was like, this isn't a caramel macchiato. What the heck is going on? So I tried that one, and the activity is you taste it and write down all the flavor notes you could think of. So I got blueberries. One of them kind of tastes a little bit nutty, a little bit chocolatey. Some of them are a mix of the two. And then I got to one that tasted a little bit like metal. And then I got to another one where I was kind of like, this doesn't really taste like much, but it's warm coffee. So, you know, it's pretty good. Then what he did was he had us wait 10 minutes for it to cool down. During the 10 minutes, we go over how to brew coffee, why temperature matters, different grind sizes, that kind of spiel. And then we taste the coffees again. Some of the coffees maintained the same flavor even when it was cold. Some coffees had a different flavor when it got cold. And other coffees just tasted really, really bad. The difference he was explaining was good quality coffee will be like one of these first two. They'll either maintain the flavor the whole time as it cools down, or it'll change flavor and it'll still taste good. Like you might get different fruit notes, but it'll still taste good. And then at the end, if it tastes like crap, then it's not a good quality coffee. And that's the reason why you can go to a McDonald's or a gas station, or you can order it black from somewhere else, and it'll taste good when you're first drinking it. And then you forget about it for an hour and you drink it again like lukewarm, and you're like, what is this and why did I pay for it? And you toss it out. That's not a good quality coffee. If it is a good quality coffee, it'll taste good even when it's cool. So this leads to the question though, how do I know I'm gonna get a good cup of coffee before I pay for it? Because that's the big thing. I don't want you guys spending money on bad coffee if you can avoid it. With that being said, I'm assuming most of you guys are here in the Starbucks is my whole coffee world realm. And I'm gonna take you guys into the light roast V60 pour over single origin realm. And you're like, well, what are all those fancy words? Doesn't matter really. I'm just gonna show you what to look for when you walk into a coffee shop, or you're looking for a coffee shop and you wanna say, I wanna taste good coffee. How can I find good coffee in my area? So tip number 1 is don't search coffee shop, don't search cafe when you're searching Google Maps or whatever web browser you're using. Search for coffee roaster near me. And the reason you want coffee roaster is because the people who get the beans and import them, they spend money to do that, are probably gonna know how to best take care of the bean to get the best flavor. For Starbucks and Peet's and I'm assuming Philz, because Philz is pretty big now too. A lot of them do a lot of dark roast, and they do a dark roast because they need consistent flavor all across, and then they compensate using syrups and creams and sugars and all that other stuff. So that way the end user, the customer, can get the same product no matter which Starbucks they're going to. But let's say we're using light roast beans, which are a little bit more, I'd say volatile. There's a place in Manila called EDSA. If you guys are in Manila, I would highly recommend following their page and showing up to a cupping session. And you're going, what's a cupping session? It's a time where you can show up and you can drink a bunch of coffee and you get to sip a bunch of different really, really good coffees and figure out what's good, what's not. They are phenomenal. To make sure the quality is good on every cup of coffee, they will calibrate their beans, meaning they will run the recipe twice a day. Twice a day, and they'll figure out if they need to adjust the temperature up and down, if the grind size needs to be a little bit bigger or smaller, twice a day for everyone who uses their coffee. So the flavor is consistent all across. Starbucks and Peet's, probably too big to do that. So they said, do everything dark or do a majority of it dark. You can do some medium roast in there, but they're not serving light roast. It's for that reason. All right, so now that you found a coffee roaster near you, after that, I search the pictures and I look for anything that looks like this. It could be something exactly like this. It could be like this, but it's clear. It could be like this, but there's a machine on top, also legitimate. It could be a Chemex, which looks like a giant vase. It's like a bottom. Imagine if this was one piece. It's like a big bottom and then a sprawl out on top. Chemex is decent as well. I look for places like that because that's the extraction method I like out of my coffee. And so I'll look for somewhere that has that. And then the last thing I'll look for is I'll try and take a look at their menu and see if they have anything from Africa, Kenya bean or Ethiopia bean. Sometimes I'm not too big of a fan of the South American beans. Well, I take that back. The only one I don't like is a Colombian. I like Honduras coffee is pretty good. Peru is pretty good. They're all very good depending on what you like in your coffee, what you'd like to taste in your coffee. But to start out, if you're really new to this and you really want to see the big contrast between a Starbucks, Peet's, Philz versus the third wave coffees or the single origin, like the people who really take artisan care of their coffees, I would look for Ethiopia. That's it. Just look for an Ethiopia. See if they serve an Ethiopia coffee. And if they do, fantastic, show up. But we're not done yet. I'm looking to see if the beans they have are exposed to sunlight. I walked into some cafes and they have these beautiful looking towers of beans and it goes all the way to the ceiling and there's a little thing on the bottom and they measure out the beans by opening the little shaft on the bottom and it's completely clear and you can see the different colors of the beans and different roasts and it's awesome. When I go somewhere like that, I generally don't get their coffee because the beans exposed to sunlight quicken the expiration date. After 2 weeks of roasting is like the peak time to get the beans because that's when the most flavor is there. And then after a month, it starts falling off a bit. So if it's exposed to too much sunlight, that's not for me. You want to look for beans that, a place that doesn't have their beans lying around exposed where sun is hitting them all the time. So that's number one. Number two, I'm looking at the barista to see if they're doing certain things to know, so I know if they're well trained or not. And that will let me know if I'm going to order pour over from the barista or if I'm going to be sipping iced white mocha decaf out of my wife's coffee. So this is what I'm looking for. Now your job is to see, does the barista know what they're doing or should I order from maybe somewhere else? So does the barista pour water on the filter before he puts the coffee grounds in? And you should see him kind of soak it a bit. And the reason for that is because if you don't, you get this hot water touching paper and wax. And with the beans, you get this really awesome paper waxy taste that gets mixed in with the beans too. Just kidding, you don't want that. You want him to wet the filter to get rid of that taste. And so you're only getting the flavor notes of the coffee. The second thing I'm looking for is, does the barista pay attention to the way they're pouring? Are they pouring haphazardly like this and talking to a buddy and just letting the water agitate the beans? However, that leads to an unbalanced cup because some parts of the beans are extracted more than others because now they're floating around. They don't have to be super delicate, but are they paying attention to the way they're pouring? And believe it or not, that matters. That affects the taste of the coffee. That affects how long the coffee will taste good for. The third thing I'm looking for, which is a really big telltale sign for me. Actually, if I see this, for the most part, I almost don't even watch the barista. But do they heat the cup they're going to serve you in before putting the coffee in? Now, how they do that, they pour hot water in it. And they let it sit there for a little bit. Generally, while they're brewing or as the coffee's heating up, they'll dump the water out, pour the coffee in. So that way you get served in a nice warm cup. Number one, that feels really good in the hands. And number two, the reason for that is because, like I said earlier, some coffees will have different flavor notes while it's higher and then have different flavors as it cools down. But if the coffee cup is cold when they serve it and you pour, the cup will cool the coffee already. So you're missing out on all these flavors. That's like paying for a movie ticket and only watching 3/4 of the movie. Sure, yeah, it's probably still enjoyable, but you already paid for the whole ticket. You might as well get the full movie, right? So for this one, you pay for the whole cup of coffee, might as well get all the flavors. So Now that you've got your coffee and you're about to taste it, don't put any cream, no sugar, don't do any of that. You want to get the coffee just flat as it is. And if you're seeing flavor notes on the side, it should taste like plum or strawberries or apple or whatever, and you sip it and it doesn't taste like that, don't worry about it. That's just the way that the person who was tasting it tasted. If you sip it and you get completely different flavors, you get like grape and almonds or whatever the mix is, then good, enjoy your coffee as it is. You shouldn't need any cream, you shouldn't need any sugar. It should taste good, non-bitter on its own, especially if it's a light roast like Ethiopia or Kenya, etc. Now, by the off chance, if you go to one of these places that does that and you see geisha beans that are like $15 a cup, I would highly recommend you get the geisha beans. These beans have won the Barista World Championships multiple times. I sent my cousin over to our favorite coffee shop and I didn't know they were serving geisha beans, but they're like, man, this is really expensive coffee. And we're like, well, technically it's more than a Starbucks, so yeah, maybe. And then we found out it was $15 a cup and the beans were geisha beans. We're like, oh shoot, if we had known, we would have driven over there. Geisha beans are like top of the line. So if you see geisha beans, I would highly recommend. They're worth the $15. First time we had geisha beans, we were in Japan, and man, it was really worth it. So that being said, I want you guys to try the African coffees because those generally have more fruity ones. If you're more partial to chocolate, nutty flavors, go to the South America ones. And I want you guys to experience this, kind of this world of what coffee can be like without cream and sugar, because this is what I drink in the morning. So some people ask, how do you drink coffee black? Well, that's how. I have really good flavors in my coffee where I don't need cream and sugar. It's not super bitter, but I get the caffeine. But if you drink this and you still like the latte or the mocha and all that other stuff, feel free to go back to it. I just made this video so you guys know that this other world of like artesian coffee is out here. And it's, in my opinion, it's healthier because you don't need the cream and sugar to compensate the bitterness. You can just drink this plain black, be fasted or whatever you're doing or having coffee in your mix. And that's it, guys. Thanks for staying tuned. Please like and subscribe. See you guys tomorrow.